Okay, we start then. Good morning, Sanjay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We welcome you all to Amity Global Leadership Studio, which is a platform for global thought leaders and captains of industry to share their ideas and insights on current issues of interest to all of us in the corporate world and in other organizations. I am your host, Brigadier Rajesh Sharma, Director, Amity Institute of Training and Development, which provides learning and development solutions to our corporate and other clients. Today, we have invited Mr. Sanjay Vyas, Global Strategic Business Unit Head, Clinical Logistics and Global Safety Services, and the Managing Director, Parexel India. He wears these three hats, in a business which is one of the largest clinical research organizations in the world. So how does Mr. Sanjay navigate his triple-hatted role with head, heart, and guts? He's here with us today to share his experience and his insights. Ladies and gentlemen, senior corporate leaders often perform multiple roles with different responsibilities. While it can be gratifying, yet at the same time, managing multiple roles can lead to role conflict and time pressures. These roles compete for a leader's attention, creating sometimes a win-loss situation. In Sanjay's case, the parent company is in the United States and is heading this strategic business unit where he has to develop strategic direction and provide the leadership and vision necessary to grow the 6,000 plus India organization. I will begin today's discussion so that our viewers can understand the different roles that Sanjay performs. So we'll start off, Sanjay, can you please tell us what exactly are the three roles that you perform? Your span of control and, so that we get an understanding of the three hats that you wear. I think you are muted, sir.
No, sir.
You're still
Your
mute.
voice.
Yeah. Can you help him, Tanvi?
Yes, just a minute. Can you unmute now? No, it's not. One second.
Mr. Sanjay, there's a glitch. Just 1 second, sir.
So kindly rejoin your meeting, sir.
We'll start in just a few minutes.
So do let me know.
Yes, Brigadier, sir.
I think you're connected now, Mr. Sanjay. Can we try out your audio, sir? Tanvi?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We are in touch.
Okay, I can't hear him.
Sir, we are in touch with the IT team there. One second. We are just trying out. Mr. Sanjay, just try to, open the microphone once on your system. If it's off, just check that once, please, on your end.
But can we hear Mr. Sanjay?
No, sir. We're just trying to get in touch with the IT team there.
What is the problem?
So we'll just start in a few more minutes. There's some technical glitch. We'll stop recording for 1 minute. Apologies to the audience. Just give us few minutes. There's some glitch on Mr. Sanjay.
That question once again, so that So as we were discussing, we are trying to understand the different roles that Mr. Sanjay performs. And so my first question was requesting him to tell us exactly what are these roles and the span of control and so over to you, Sanjay.
1 second. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Right.
Okay. 1 second. There is an echo out here. I'm just trying to adjust that. 1 second. Just
No problem. No problem.
Sounds good. So first of all, good morning to all of you, and thank you very much, Brigadier Sharma. Not sure what happened with that glitch, but I think it's at least that's what technology is all about, and good to be here. I wanted to first of all thank the Amity team as well for inviting me to talk about such an interesting topic. Just to dive straight out into the question that you asked in terms of the different roles and the span of control that I'm managing. I'm managing 2 global P&Ls and 1 country P&L at this point of time. So as you rightly mentioned that with clinical supplies and logistics, that's a global business unit that I'm managing with 500 plus teams globally and 7 plus distribution hubs. As an India country head and managing director, which I took over 4 years ago, and I moved to India from US, I'm managing and responsible for 6,000 people across 12 different functions, including the business functions and shared services team. And the third part of my role, which is the global safety services and pharmacovigilance, I have around 3,500 people globally, of which 75% are in India. But so if I really have to put together all these 3 hats together, my global team today is spread out in 4 continents, 18 plus countries. A majority of them sits in India as well. And from a direct reporting perspective, I have more than 12 VPs, senior directors, both on safety and clinical supplies reporting to me, and another 14 VPs and executive directors reporting from an India role perspective. So that's roughly the span of control that I have across 3 jobs.
So that's a handful, and it's wonderful really to be such a role where we are global as well as local. Now, with all these 3 roles, Sanjay, that you are performing, Do these roles compete with each other for your time and for your attention? And how do you prioritize and harmonize? I'm sure these kind of issues would be arising every day. And sometimes the time difference is so much, we are 5-6 hours ahead and 5-6 hours behind, so all those problems are there.
Yeah.
So how do you manage to harmonize?
Now, I think it's an interesting one because, yes, there are competing priorities at times, but they're also complementing in many aspects. The diversity of this role, on one hand, in clinical supplies, I'm focusing on GMP, GDP compliance, whereas when I'm looking at pharmacovigilance safety services, I'm focusing on GCP and GLP compliance. And the India role includes everything from general management to driving growth strategies. On one hand, I'm focused on getting the right drug in the right condition to the right patient, whereas on other aspect, I'm managing patient safety and adverse events. And on India role, I'm focusing on supporting the clinical conduct globally. India is like a mini CRO here with almost 6,000 people sitting in this part of the world. And as you rightly alluded, the biggest challenge that happens to me is the time management and the time zone management, because India starts in the morning and then comes Europe. By the time you're reaching afternoon, your European colleagues are up, and my clinical supply chain main distribution hub is in Germany and in US. And at the same time, by the time you're finished dealing with Europe, and then US starts coming up, so that's when your corporate office is up, and then you have to start addressing those challenges as well. I think the other challenge that I always continue to face in this role is the cultural barriers as well, because it's not just the time zone management, but you need to deal on a daily basis with different stakeholders, not only internally, but also from an external stakeholder management perspective, because the customers or the sponsors that you're dealing with are very different in these different business units. You're dealing sometimes with enterprise C-level executives day one, and second day you're dealing with a small startup biotech organization who is trying to do a study conduct, and how are you dealing with that perspective as well. But I think it's critical to have a very strong, efficient leadership under I would always say level L1 - 2, that technically allows me to prioritize my time commitments as well. And that is where how I try to focus. What I try to do is 30% of my time, I try to focus on business and growth strategies. 40% goes in the day-to-day affairs. So depending on where the challenges are coming in, where the prioritization is of the customers, I pick and choose between those. And then the balance 30% of my time goes in terms of my leadership alignment, talking to my leaders on a regular basis, people management, understanding the challenges on the ground, and any unique learning opportunities that come across. So yes, I think the plan changes every day, Brigadier Sharma. It's not like it's a one size or one plan fits all, depending on the time of the moment. So.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's wonderful actually, and it's like the financial world, which begins early morning in Japan and then at the end of the day, United States. So you're literally busy throughout the day. Balancing these time zones can be, very, very, very challenging at times.
Yeah.
So on top of that, you would like to lead with your head and the heart, and also you would like to be, take a bit of risk in your decision making. So our understanding of leading with the heart would be being inclusive, putting people first, being empathetic. Leading with the head would imply seeing the big picture, goal orientation. And leading with the guts involves risk-taking and decision-making, I'm sure, in very uncertain situations.
Yeah.
So what does this mean to you, Sanjay, leading with head, heart, and guts? And it's your mantra, I can make out.
Yeah, well, not only mantra, but to be very honest with you, Brigadier Sharma, I would like to share with people, I actually follow, and this is the book that influenced me the most. When I started early on in my career, and I was actually just getting into the leadership position at that point of time, Head, Heart, and Guts. It's by David Daltich, Peter Cairo, and Stephen Ryan-Smith. But let me tell you, I think we all know the importance of these three human qualities, which is head, heart, and guts. And it has been recognized before our time. This idea is not new. It is something which has been in existence even before you and we have been into the industry or been in our part of the thing. And I'd like to give an example. I don't know if many of you would have seen the movie The Wizard of Oz. And in The Wizard of Oz, it's a very classic cult movie. It's a book also that's been written out there. It's a child classic. And in The Wizard of Oz, there are three main characters in that book and in that movie. One of them is the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Cowardly Lion, right? And if you really look at what are they doing in that entire movie, the Scarecrow is searching for brains, the Tin Man is searching for a heart, and the Cowardly Lion is searching for courage. It's simply put together head, heart, and guts. Each of them was searching for the missing piece that would make them whole, and each had an underdeveloped capacity that either they didn't know about it or they didn't know how to use what they had. And I think I learned in my early part of my career, as I was starting to get into leadership, I was still not there, but I was fortunate enough, I was able to attend this executive leadership program where the authors actually were present out there, and it laid a very long impression. I think leaders like us, like me, we are in the same situation because we are trying to search for that key personal quality that would make us a holistic leader all the time. And that's when, for any leader, all these three qualities are critical, because there are times when you have to make a decision with fact base and not just emotions. But there are times when you have to display the highest level of empathy. Like what happened during COVID required the leadership to show the highest level of empathy with their people and their employees at this point of time. And then there are times when you have to take calculative risks, make gutsy decisions to make things happen, and especially to break the glass ceiling, because there are times when you reach the glass ceiling and you don't know, and this is where you have to step outside of your comfort zone to make some of those gutsy decisions. And hence, for me, leading with head, heart, and guts is to ensure that we continue to find and develop a fine balance between these three qualities, because it's not necessarily, there are times when you have to use one a little bit more than the other and balance it out. So it's the ability to ensuring the right balancing of these qualities when leading in the front. And it's not just leading in the front, but I say that these qualities can be used in your day-to-day life when you're dealing with your family, in your personal situation, or in your professional life as well. It's something which you require and makes you a holistic leader. So, yeah.
Yes, that's we exactly agree with you. But a little bit about guts, it's very relevant in your case when you're dealing with trials.
Yeah.
Do you feel that the trials are sufficient? We got the right data, we had the right patients in the right condition, and now we can go ahead with this. This can be a very, very challenging decision because it involves human lives. It involves your client's reputation.
Absolutely.
So it's really a very fine game that you have to, it's extremely difficult at times.
Yeah, because if you're not able to, as you rightly mentioned, Brigadier Sharma, if you're not able to balance out the fact base, because you have to look at the data, is the drug efficacy and the safety proven? If the drug safety efficacy is proven, you have enough information before you submit your dossiers to the FDA or the EMEA team for their approval. You're dealing with patients' lives at the end of the day, and hence balancing that out with fact-based decision, empathy at the heart, because you need to keep the patient at the heart, because ultimately these drugs are going to impact patients' lives. And then how do you then finally make decisions of getting these products launched into the market as well? So absolutely, this is something interesting. But as I said, it's just not necessarily it has applies in my industry alone, but it probably can be used across many other industries that we deal on a daily basis.
Yeah, so what it really boils down to is, Sanjay, is you have to do at your level strategic thinking. You want to be emotionally intelligent, deal with the people, and their feelings. You understand their empathy.
Yep.
And of course, risk taking. So we want to understand what goes on in your head, Sanjay, when you're facing these challenging situations. Can you give us a few examples, like some dilemmas you faced and how you overcame these things? It'll be very interesting to hear your live examples.
Yeah, it's never an easy moment or easy decisions. I think more than successes, Brigadier Sharma, I believe failures are important. And not only they're important, but how do you learn from it and not make the same mistakes is also very critical. And this is where your strategic thinking, your emotional intelligence, and the courage to make decisions come into play, right? I can give you a few examples. There was a time in one of my past careers, we were going to launch an order-to-cash solution. Now, this was for a drug. This was when I was managing the downstream of the supply chain, a finished product, which was pretty expensive product. And the Australian government wanted to, because by the time it reaches from a pharmaceutical company to the distributor, from a distributor to the pharmacist, it pads up the margins, and these expensive drugs can become more expensive to the end patients. And the government wanted to actually reach the patients directly and remove the middlemen. Now, how do you do that? And I was a part of a global logistics organization where we actually sat and made a decision to technically develop a very unique value proposition of acting as a distributor without being a distributor. Because when the moment you become a distributor, the liability of the product comes into you. Now, just imagine a logistics organization when I had to go back to my chairman and present this business case. The first thing they said was, no, it's not possible because there's a huge risk and liability involved. If something happens with a drug, it's the pharmaceutical companies know how to deal with it, but we are not. So we had to work a very unique value proposition where we just kept the inventory of the product on the books for the time being until it passed on. But we had to create an entire value proposition. I had to go at least 5 times in front of my chairman before we created a tripartite agreement between the sponsor company, us, and the final distribution process. And that was a good success story, right? It actually allowed us to take the drug directly into the market as well. I can also give you another example was, I still remember this was in the early part of my career. And this is where conviction is needed, the courage to make decisions. And we were going actually for a $400 million opportunity. And my global CEO and chairman was going to attend this meeting because of the size of this deal. He flew in from Germany, and in US, we were going to meet up with the meeting. And I had to literally go through 24 iterations of that presentation. And I was like leading that account. And then at the last moment, we were in the car discussing this, and my CEO said, and there were certain slides I wanted him to present. And I said, I was very sure this is the best strategy. And he's like, no, I don't think this is going to work. And I said, you know what? If you can't do it, I am going to do it. And my leader was sitting next to me, and he was literally driving, and he was like, shit, I'm like, what did you just say? It's like, your CEO's in the chair. But the CEOs agreed. At that point, they said, okay, let's see your conviction. And at that point of time, that 1-hour meeting turned out to be a 4-hour meeting. And Brigadier Sharma, we won $320 million out of that $400 million. My CEO walked out, and this requires, again, a lot of gut and conviction to stand up to your leadership and say how much you believe in what you do, right? And he literally said, this is the best meeting I've ever seen and the best prep that I've ever seen. So I think sometimes coming up that getting that emotional intelligence, strategic thinking, and making those bold decisions are very critical. By the way, I've had failures as well. So there was a Medical Express product that we were launching. We launched it in a hurry because we wanted to, it was in a life sciences event, 300 customers were there. We talked about it and we said, okay, hey, here's your new product focused on life sciences. And we very soon realized that the first few shipments were a disaster because we started trying to put the same shipments to the standard yellow machine, which was already being set. We didn't realize that you need a deviation of the process. And we very soon learned. But what was important was for me to go back to my management and say, hey, we failed. We failed. This is the challenge that came across from that perspective. This is the fact base and the reason why we failed. We said we need 6 months more to do this whole process, do a dummy run, and then come back with the product. And believe it or not, Brigadier Sharma, the management believed it. They know that we had a little bit of reputational damage, but they allowed us to bring up that revised plan and we implemented this. And then 8 months down the lane, we relaunched the product again, and it was a success. But what was important was the learning from the failure that we had. We didn't give up. Because otherwise, we could have just said, okay, let's give up on the same. India is another great success story. When I came down to India, we spinned off a business unit. We had reached a glass ceiling. We had some tough decisions to be made. We were only 4,100 people at that point of time. So the success story lies in we not only changed the culture within India in terms of how we look at the strategy, but we came up with 21 initiatives across 4 pillars. And this was not done by me. This was done by the next level of leadership. What I was able to do was I was able to push the emotional intelligence of my leaders to start thinking, hey, if you want to take India to the next level, what is it that you need to do? And believe it or not, they came with 300 ideas. Those 300 ideas were then boiled down to 21 because you cannot go for everything. We shortlisted it, and today almost 75% of those initiatives have been launched and have been successful. We grew from 4,100 people to 6,000 people in a span of last 3 years now. So this is the success story of ownership, management, engagement from a strategic thinking and emotional intelligence, and the applicability of that. Because when you put people in charge and let them think as to what does it mean, because emotional intelligence is about putting yourself into the shoes of somebody else and understanding the psyche about it as well. I think there are many such stories out there that goes, but at the end of the day, it's not about many discussions that we've had. I just was 2 weeks back in a negotiation with a global sponsor. The procurement guys were pushing for cost reduction. And how did we divert that entire discussion from the cost of input to the value of output? This was a big risk. It was a big customer. They could have just walked away and said, you know what? But what mattered was, again, the conviction in terms of the courage to make a decision and say, hey, we cannot reduce the price, but you look at the value that we have brought in this relationship over the 5 years. I think these are some of the examples I wanted to bring together where strategic thinking, emotional intelligence, and the courage to make decisions matters. And as I said, I've failed and succeeded in certain, and I've learned from it.
Oh, these are wonderful examples. I mean, you have covered all three aspects. And I'm really, I can make out that you being emotionally intelligent would also involve when you're talking to the CEO in the car, you're getting inside his head also. And that's a big risk to take. Absolutely. Because he may be thinking something entirely different, and and you may go entirely wrong. At that level, well, I have also had some experience in life, at that level, you just cannot afford to make a mistake or annoy the boss, because that can be the end of everything. So wonderful example, Sanjay. I'm sure our viewers are inspired.
No, but believe it or not, I still remember, I get goosebumps every time I think of it, because I was a young guy just getting into it. And I was worried. I thought if this meeting didn't go well, I was ready to, I would have lost my job, at that point of time. And but that having that, you're absolutely right, those emotions and those conviction in terms of understanding what your CEO could think and what is the best for your sponsor, because it's the emotional intelligence of not just your CEO, it's the emotional intelligence of your customer as well. Like, what does the customer want? Do you really understand it? And are you giving him what he's looking out for, rather than just pushing your product onto them, right? So it matters both.
There is an element of, when you reach the level that you are at, and there is a level of, a confidence which comes in a man, a satisfaction which comes in a man of having done well, done his best, got all the facts right, got all the data and research. And then looking for future roles, or going into higher things sometimes is not that important. So that itself, that faith in yourself and the satisfaction you've had of your past life and your achievements in life, that itself is give you sufficient happiness to be able to take risks, because you say, I can lose it. I mean, I don't mind. Is that something which you agree with, Sanjay?
I do, but again, which is where I always use the word taking calculative risks is important, not just crazy risk, which is where sometimes you need, which comes back to the fact base of finding that right balance, because you need to have some fact base behind. The reason I took the call on that day is because I did research for 6 months on this opportunity before I met 128 stakeholders, understanding what was their core problem, what were the 3 top challenges. And that's when I was ready to make that call and make that decision. So it's not just about out of a blue moon, I just have my ego and I come back and say, hey, you know what? I can just say. So I think it's balancing that guts piece out is very critical, making those calculative risks. Yeah, there are times when you don't have the fact base, and that's when then your inner conviction comes into play and say, hey, what's the right thing to do in this scenario, when you literally have not many choices left? And that's when you need to make some tough decisions. And yeah, you do take the risk, and then you put your career, your reputation at stake. And but I think believing in what you're doing and is it the right thing to do, I think that's very much important. And this is why I come back to that conviction of taking the guts and making the right call. And it's never right or wrong. That's why I said you're never right or wrong. So it's funny because I'll tell you an interesting thing, because I was at Harvard a couple of 2 years back doing my advanced management program. And the reason I bring this example is because there were 172 leaders in that room doing 300 case studies, right? And on almost 3 months process. And funny enough, that every leader responded to a problem in 5 different ways, and 5 different solutions could have implemented for a real life scenario. So that's why it depends. It depends on who is sitting on the side of the table and what is your conviction, what values you grow up with, and what is the style with which you approach certain challenges. I think that's what matters when you're around these situations.
Yes, fully agree with. No, it's a very important element of decision making when there is ambiguity, the lack of clarity. And I'm sure at your level, you will never have all the facts, all the permutation combinations solved out. It's never. So how do you, when you feel that to do or not to do, to take the step or not to take step, you're not too sure what's other side of the hill, as we say in the army. So how do you take the final decision?
Well, I think again, what I said, for me, the final decisions on a couple of factors. One is one of the most important things I always try to do is I try to toss out my ideas with my immediate leadership, because I try to toss. It's not necessarily that I would probably ultimately I'll make my final decision, but making sure that talking to your leaders, tossing your ideas across your trusted leaders, your mentors, or your genuine critics. You should always have some genuine critics around you who can tell you. It's like showing yourself the mirror, right? As you'll get some perspectives and will help you make decisions when balancing the fact base. Because while you have the fact base, but it's important that you toss your ideas with your leadership and understand what do they think if a particular decision was made, how would they react to it, and not only within your teams, but what I also try to do is I also toss my ideas across my peers, who are leading other functions, and I say, hey, if you are in my situation, how would you have seen this particular perspective? And those are some of the factors I take into considerations when coming to the final decisions. I think continuing to challenge the status quo, weighing the pros and cons of its situation is also very critical. And most importantly, I think when you're making decisions, knowing the fear of failure is critical. You cannot be overconfident. You need to know the fear of failure, but ability to make a decision, move on with it without engaging in bureaucracy is also critical. I think, which is where I think having a strong conviction, making the right decision, and then sometimes you make a call and then you go and seek forgiveness, whether you're successful or not, but owing to it is critical. If you fail, then you be bold enough to go and seek forgiveness and say, hey, you know what, we failed. Like I talked about the example of the failure of the product. We went and confessed, yes, we screwed up. We had a failure on this particular situation, but we know how to come back. We know what is the situation out there. So facing your failures, knowing your fear of failure, but at the same time having a strong conviction to make the decision to make that bold step. And then whether you succeed, then you give the due credit to the team. And if you fail, then owe it and move on. So
there's a very, we all been through the pandemic, Sanjay. Now, if you recall, early 1920, suddenly it was upon us, and within 2 months, it had flown out of China and come into the United States, then it spread into Asia, Africa. Now, every company, almost in every country, just were dumbstruck. They were hit.
Absolutely.
Now, this, I believe, was they had never anticipated a black swan event of that nature. Now, that kind of a thing, especially in the pharma world, and can happen at any time. So, what advice would you give to to the audience and our other leaders who are here? How do you plan for such unforeseen events? Yeah. Because it can hit you anytime and hit you very badly.
Yeah, I think as you rightly mentioned, none of us were prepared for such a black swan event, because in our lifetime, we had not seen a pandemic like this, right? And something like this, when it hits you, I think your basic instincts of making call on the fly is what comes into play. And I think as a leader, this is what the biggest challenge. Like the day one when the COVID happened and that scare spread, I still remember our people who were half the people in the office suddenly started scrambling out and running back home. It's like they didn't want to stay back into the office. And then how do you make sure that the 6,000 plus people in the country are up and running in 24 hours on their laptops? Like we had shorted, not all the people had laptops at that point of time. We had to actually provide 1,500, like out of the 5,000 plus people, there were 1,500 who had desktops. So making sure that our 1,500 people were equipped with laptops in 24 hours time, and make sure that they had the right equipment to work from home, right from internet to whatever the basic capacity. We were able to make some of those calls on that, which is why I said a teamwork was needed. We actually even put together a COVID task force. What the whole idea was that, and luckily because we are a part of the clinical research organization, we had physicians who were experts because people were panicking. How do you make sure that people have somebody to call upon and talk to physicians as to what does this mean, from a pandemic perspective? There was a set of what you call a dedicated call that was placed. These guys were doing their day jobs as medical monitors, but at the same time, they were helping our colleagues internally to also answer their questions from that perspective. The other piece is also over a period of time, we certainly moved from a full-blown working environment to a completely hybrid working or a what you call a working from home environment as well. I think the couple of factors went into that. It was just not one situation. So, and of course, now we have learned from that. We have actually now prepared ourselves now to a completely working from home or a hybrid environment. Tomorrow, if a pandemic hits, there are some lessons learned. All our 6,000 people are now equipped with digital platforms that today can enable them to tomorrow, if they can't come to the office, let's say an earthquake strikes or something else happens. How do you make sure that that BCP gets activated? But I said learning from this pandemic has come into play. But the most important part in this whole process, Brigadier Sharma, was the empathy. I think what happened was while the wave one happened, you were listening to stories of someone like getting impacted. In wave two, it came so close that I started hearing stories about our own people, like our own, I still had a situation when I was on a town hall with the team, and one of our office boys who used to get the tea every day in the morning, right? And knew him by person. I used to talk to him every day about his family. And suddenly I came to know that he succumbed to COVID, right? It was such an emotional moment for us. I almost got choked in one of the town halls that I was speaking about it. But then genuinely bringing your authentic self and putting that empathy at the top of that pyramid when you're making the decisions about business was critical. The 6,000 people stood by me to make sure that we didn't drop a single process in the quality. We had not a single drop in our deliverables, but at the same time, making sure that they had time, flexibility to take care of their akin, making sure that sometimes, somebody's father, somebody's mother, somebody's brother, somebody's in-law, sister got impacted. We were giving enough time for them to take care of their family. And then while balancing out the work also is very critical. And I think all those factors came into play as we were making those calls, which is why I said this was not known, or these were all very good lessons learned during this process. And most of the decisions were on the fly. So.
Yes, thank you so much. I think we fully agree with that. But that leads us to another question of motivation, of inspiring people, and getting the work done through them. Especially in your case, where you're always against time because the client wants to take the drug to the market at the earliest. And you're all the time telling, all right, there's one stage left. This is a few days more. There's a pressure on everybody in the organization to deliver. So how do you motivate people? How do you inspire people? I mean, we all know about the theories of motivation and all, but I'm sure with your personal experience, you have got some insights which you can share with us.
I think the most important piece of motivation, Brigadier Sharma, is connecting with people at the lowest possible level. And I think these are the times, it's just not about COVID. I think in general, day-to-day scenarios as well, I think people want to be listened. People want somebody who can connect and believe strong, because you can believe strongly in the purpose, but if your team doesn't believe in the same purpose, goal, and objective, like for example, in PowerXL, we strongly believe in the purpose of with heart principles. And that's why you see behind me also, there's a with heart logo that sits on me. The reason is because we live that with heart principle with the fact that we know that at the end of the day, any and every decision that we make at the end of the day is going to impact a patient's life. It will help a patient. There are patients who are at the last leg of their journey. We had a situation in COVID when a cancer patient, and I like to give this example because he was coming to Singapore from Malaysia every week for treatment because the doctors were in Malaysia, the clinical study was happening in Singapore, but he was driving over the border. And just imagine when COVID happened, the border shut down. And when the border shut down, this patient was on a critical stage 3 scenario and was not able to make it. So this is where the creativity of the people, the medical monitors, the regulatory experts, the clinical supply chain team, they all came together and they found an alternative way of actually working with the MHRAs and taking special permission to get that drug directly from the distribution center to the patient's home and send a nurse at the same time as well to make sure that the medication regime doesn't get defeated. Because for the last 2 years, he's been on that medication regime. If he stopped now, he would have ended up losing his life. But that is where being an authentic leader and believing strongly in the purpose that you convey and not just state it, because that's the purpose you want your organization, your teams to live by. And it is important for them to believe in that purpose is also very important. I think the other piece I always tell people and always my leaders, we don't do good enough a job of taking an opportunity to pat the back. I think we should not miss an opportunity to give that simplest of motivation and take every moment to recognize as a simple appreciation goes a long way. A culture of recognition is what, so we implemented what we call it as a quarterly culture recognition now, where we award Bravo points randomly, that on an average 25,000 points or 1 lakh points have been distributed to people across. But that culture of motivation is also a culture of recognition is also very critical for people to understand. Getting that pat on the back for simplest of work that they do is also very critical. And then last but not the least, but standing up and leading up from the front in the time of distress and giving the due credit where it's deserved, that also leads to a lot of motivation as well. You got to be curious. You got to keep a pulse on the ground, knowing what's happening through your leadership. Knowing enough about initiatives to be dangerous and asking the right questions is critical, because when the team knows that as a leader, you are vested. You're asking the right questions. You are enough. You're not just like at somewhere at a superficial level. So how do you balance that? And then last but not the least, brave enough to trust and empower your teams to make the decisions, but also to ensure that while you've trusted the decisions, you verify your trust on a regular basis. And I think all of these factors put together are very critical to keep your teams motivated and inspired throughout the process. So it's just not one single formula that helps you from the motivational theories.
So, at your level, you require a very good team, who can tell you, this is what I really feel, I don't agree with you here. So how do you build this kind of a team? And you are different geographies all over the world. How does a senior leader with multi-hatted role, how do you build that team with whom you are confident, you are sure, or is it, you can't leave it to the HR to get you the best guys, So how do you build that team, and how much time does it take? What's your experience?
It's interesting. So when I took my first role in Parexel, which is the clinical supply chain, the first time I met my leadership. Now, when somebody from outside tries to come into a new organization, you don't develop that confidence straight out, right? But having the speak up culture and open and honest conversation, the first thing I told my team, my immediate leadership team, that I inherited. And I said, you know what, guys, I know that maybe you don't trust me and I don't trust you right at this point of time. But I think it's important and brave enough for us to build that trust. And I think that's where it starts. And it will not happen one day. Brigadier Sharma, it can take anywhere between 6 to 12 months. I still remember a conversation that I had with one of my leaders who actually had applied for the same position that I got the job on. And I came in, right? And then imagine then when you have to deal and he becomes a part of your team as well. I think bringing enough that trust and giving the confidence to your team that you make the decision, I will stand by you. And creating that speak up culture in your regular forums is very critical. I think having open, honest debates and without keeping your ego outside the room and not just saying that, okay, it's my way or highway, right? That doesn't work in a daily organization, which is where I had earlier also alluded that even when I make decisions, I toss my ideas with my leadership because they feel they're engaged. They feel that they're becoming a part of that decision-making process. So I think making them a part, because what happens is once you engage them as a part of the decision-making process, the ownership of the success of that also then gets spread out. It's not me alone. It's spread across the entire team. So I think that is very, very critical as you're talking to your team and making sure that trust builds up. And yes, it does take a year, 18 months by the time what I call is then you move from a trust but verify environment to a blinded trust. And that's the kind of big success. Like today, I have a blinded trust in my next line of leadership because I know that when they will make a decision, they will make a decision in the best interest of not only themselves, but me as a leader, but as an organization as well. And getting to that blinded trust is a journey. It's a journey that you have to walk with them together and you have to give them the chance to fail and succeed. By the way, we have had times when we have not agreed we have agreed to disagree. And we have walked out of the room not agreeing on certain things. And there are times when I have to make a decision, still have to go ahead and make certain decisions. And there are still times I have to give in my ego and say, hey, you know what? I think you're right. You are right in this particular process. And I need to go around with whatever decisions are you making. I think keeping that open channel of communication and open channel of acceptance is also very critical.
Yes, and I'm reminded of an incident in Mahatma Gandhi's life. A press reporter asked him, "But Mahatma, you said something directly opposite of what you're saying today. Last week you said something entirely different." So he said, "Well, I've learned over the last 1 week."
Yeah.
So if that is the kind of humility and that's the kind of openness to learning, that can be a very important quality to have for a senior leader.
Yeah.
I would also now request our participants to they can come onto the chat box and put in their questions before we end. I'm going to ask 1 or 2 questions more. So please pop up your questions as and when you feel that you want some answers from Sanjay. All right, Sanjay, I'll ask you before we ask you to share your views and overall in the end. But I feel that from my experience in the army, a senior leader is a lonely man. I know that at the top of the rung, when you reach there, you are a lonely man. There's a limit to which you can get answers. There's a limit to which you can solve. At the end of the day, it's your decision. So what makes you, what helps you overcome these challenges? Because you cannot wait for answers, because at the end of the day, it's your role. It's your job. How do you?
You bring in a good point, Brigadier Sharma, because it's tough to be alone sometimes. And there's times when you're in a dilemma, if you're making the right decision or not. And then at that point of time, you've already ran out of options of talking to your teams or whatever it is. I think, but my biggest motivation and inner strength comes when I'm talking to people across at various levels, especially to your Gen Z colleagues and the young generation as well. I think that's very critical. You just alluded to a very interesting point. I think many times our leaders, or as we're becoming leaders, we tend to stop learning, right? And I think somewhere, I think you need to find every opportunity and not be ashamed and going and asking the questions, hey, tell me what happens in a day in your life. I did that when I took over this role of pharmacovigilance and safety services. I took this role when I took the role of India. I sat with a medical protocol writer and told me, hey, teach me how to write a medical protocol. And the person was excited. I could understand the challenges that came in. But this is where I think the biggest motivation in your inner strength is the discussions that you have with people, and that helps you when you're alone. The second one, I think, and this is where I feel that as leader, you're never alone, because your family is the most critical at this moment. And they are there throughout the time. There have been times when I've been frustrated in my new role, and because 6 months down the lane and I was ready to quit. But what happens is when you discuss this with your family, like I've started discussing now with my elder daughter, who is just turning 18, she's bringing such different perspectives, which probably I wouldn't think from a Gen Z perspective, right? So discussing with your family some of your challenges, I think that's where, again, it's an alternative way of it. And last but not the least, I think I also try and spend some of my me time living my passion and drive and taking motivations from it. So I'm an adventure sports person. I like skydiving. I am into multiple sports like skydiving, scuba diving, and other pieces as well. Sometimes just taking a walk in the woods and refreshing yourself helps me think and go back and put myself into the perspective. But I think the one question that I always ask before I make a decision is, if I was a part of that team and if I was there, how would I perceive this decision being made, right? And I think that's very critical, which again comes back to the emotional intelligence piece of it, that putting yourself into the shoes of that scenario, not the people, but the scenario, and asking the question that if I was not in this side, and if I made this, or if my leader made this decision, if I was on the receiving end of that decision, how would I perceive that decision? And I think that's where drawing the inner strength and being lonely at the top is pretty critical. So it's a combination of factors, as I said, talking to people, family, putting yourself into that perspective and living your passion and taking motivations from your daily life, where whatever passions you live.
That I think is a wonderful way of doing things, Sanjay. We're happy that viewers have learned that from you today. Now, I think Colonel Sunil has got.
Yeah.
So
Sir.
please unmute yourself, Sunil. Go ahead and ask your question.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Sanjay.
Yeah.
This has been, I have seen you have been a very professional man in executing your official duties in that capacity. I would like to ask you that how do you strike a balance between your family life and official life? Because I was seeing your percentage which you're given to your official work, 30% business generation, 30% this and the balance, so nothing is left. So how do you in this critical time maintain your strike a balance between the family and the official work?
And how do you retain your sanity?
Yes, sir.
No, I think it's not that. So when I gave you that breakdown was my working hours. But what I tried to do, Colonel Sunil, is over the weekends, I somehow try to get into a practice of not touching my cell phone as much as I can avoid it, which is why I said living your passion. I like to, like, our family is a big foodie family. We like to go outside, eat food. Now, even by the end of this week, actually, my daughters are having their winter vacation. We're taking a break. We're going to the US West Coast together and trying to find those moments. You know, there are times when you realize that you're running at the speed of light and you need to take a step back, take a breath and think about it. It happened when I was applying for my US citizenship. And, you know, there's a form that needs to be filled up. It says how many days in and out you're of the country post your green card, right? And the amount of traveling that I did, and my elder daughter was just 7 years old at that point of time. And that was a lesson learned at that, like I'm talking about 15 years ago, 12 years ago, when I was applying for it. And I realized then the page was full. And then I had to add 2 more pages with the number of trips. And when you added the number of days, I realized I was literally gone. And I did not see my elder daughter growing for a year and a half, like 18 months put together, like the number of travel. And it struck me that out of the 7 years, I've lost 2 years of her growing up. It's not good. And since then, it made me realize I started spending more time as we got our younger daughter also was growing up. And I tried to make the most of it. It's not always easy. In the role that we are in, I'm not saying that I am not working. Yes, there are 12, 14 hours a day, week. But I don't recommend that. It all depends on how you're able to balance this out, how you're able to take those breaks, how you're making sure that your weekends are well spent talking to your family. And balancing this out, but it goes both ways, and the family also understands that piece of the bit. When sometimes when I'm not available, there are times when I've missed birthdays. I've literally missed my birthdays for my elder daughter because she always used to come for vacation to India to meet her grandparents, and I was traveling. So, you know, you got to balance it out. Some sacrifices lead to some successes, but you got to find your fine balance.
Yes, we very well put. Sunil, sorry. Can we
Secondly,
move ahead?
sir, I want to ask, can you describe a time occasion where you have to rely on your intuition or guts rather than data-driven decision making?
Yeah.
So, and what was the expected outcome of such decisions, sir?
Yeah, so I've had both success and failure where I've relied on my intuition as well. So this is, I will tell you, in an early part of my career, this is the time when .com was just booming. It has not taken its rate. I was into e-commerce.com at that point of time. And we'd implemented a .com strategy for one of the teleshopping networks, and we wanted to take it online. But we did not realize that the market was not ready for it because people did not have enough digital devices, mobile phones, and all that stuff. And we took a big intuition of launching full-on, buying inventory and all that stuff. It was a strategy failure. We had to shut down that unit, and I was the last man standing before I moved on to the other business unit. But I had to make sure that, you know, the wrap-up of the business was happening. But at the same time, I think I've taken a lot of calculated risk. I'll give you a great example with my career, right? And I think just like you guys with defense families, the ability to work in multiple countries. So I have taken risks where I've moved to 5 countries, 4 continents in a span of last 18 years. It requires a lot of convincing and intuitions, you know, like, because it's easy for you when you're moving to different countries, you have your office colleagues to connect with, but for your family, they start from scratch. How do you make the right decisions of the right spot, right location, right cultural environment, and make sure that the family also thrives while you're thriving in your career and not losing? I've seen examples where a couple of my peers actually have failed on those international assignments, and I had to come back because either the kids were not happy or they were frustrated, there were depression and other pieces as well. So I think it's an ability to bring in that instinctive nature in those practicalities is also very critical. I have many more examples, Karnav, but as I said, I think these are the two most of success and failures I wanted to bring in. So
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sunil. Sir, Dr. Shikha Dubey has a question. She wants to know, how do you think the nature of leadership will change in the future, and what skills and qualities would be essential for successful leaders in this rapidly changing world? So how do you look into the future, Sanjay?
I think one is adaptability. I think the biggest challenge is with everything that's happening around you with AI, ML, artificial intelligence. I think your ability to upscale and upskill yourself while you're trying to manage your teams. How do you pivot your organization to these new technologies that are coming up? How are you able to pivot? Because the biggest concern people have is, oh, is AI going to take away my jobs? You know, it's like, or is ML going to take away my job? Now, how do you convince that the human-machine interaction continues and you continue to adapt yourself to this new skill set while you're navigating? The other piece is, I think, with more and more geopolitical tensions and the geopolitical economics that's happening, empathy, I think having more empathetic leaders is going to be the call of the hour. It's just not, yes, bottom line is critical, top line is critical, but how do you balance the bottom line and top line along with people at the same time and bring that empathy on the table? So I think the future leaders have to be very, very adaptable. I think they are the ones who probably, I would say, getting a cross-industry experience. How do you get some of the best practices from the other industries and apply to your industries as well? How do you become more adaptable to the changing environment from a technology landscape? How do you become more adaptable to people's needs? I'll tell you the biggest challenge. Talk to the Gen Zs today and ask them. The young generation do not want to work for a company where there is no objective, no goal, no purpose. And you have to bring in authentic purpose and goal on the table. If they don't believe in that goal, you'll never be able to be successful. So convincing your new generation about the purpose of why you live and why you do what you do in an organization like in Parexcel, why we do what we do. And I think conveying that purpose is going to be critical. So that's the need of the future. How do you convey your purpose and make that purpose acceptable by everyone? Because the new generation will not work for you if they don't believe in your purpose.
There's a very interesting question from Piyush Mishra. He can also switch on his camera and unmute himself. Piyush wants to know, he says, as you shared examples of your career while you were reporting to CEOs and promoters, he says he wants to know what plays a major role between head, heart, and guts out of these three. Piyush, you would like to clarify?
Yeah, that was a call actually. While you're sharing the example of your career, when you had given at the start of your career, you were given an idea to your promoter, and you were trying to manage his emotional quotient also. So that was a thought which came in. Like, what plays a major role? It's like when you say head, it's more data driven. When you say gut, taking that ability to take that risk, or of course, when you are connecting emotionally with the person sitting up and taking a call.
Yeah. Piyush, I tell you, there's not been which is why I gave that example of the Wizard of Oz, right? I think each one of us need to make us as a whole leader, we need to have a balance of all of these three. I would not be able to pinpoint that a head is important over a heart or a heart is important over a gut, because it depends on the scenario. There are situations, like I'll tell you, I lost my elder brother pretty young in my life. He was the main inspiration to me. He was 6 years older than me. I used to look upon me. And suddenly when he passed away, I realized I had to lead the family. My mom and dad, my younger brother was looking up to me. And that's where the head and heart came into play. But there are situations when I was working on an account and turning it around from I was given the worst account. It was a $30 million account, and I had to turn it around to a $350 million account in 3 years span of time, which I did. But there I required a combination of head and guts. Heart was nowhere into the play at that point of time. The other one is, I can give you an example, is in an earlier part of my career, by the way, I have been personally laid off twice in my career. In the earlier part of I have been restructured. But what happens is when young generation, when they go through that, they start getting very emotional and they start self-doubting, right? In that case, the head and guts become stronger, because you have to position your head and guts and say, hey, I got to move on. I can't be emotional. My heart has to take a back seat and keep moving on. So I think there are certain, depending on the scenario you're in, head, heart, and guts play along with each other. They cannot be standalone. So,
got you. Thanks.
Fully agree with you there, Piyush. I'm sure you got your answer. Soumyadev Banerjee, Sanjay, he wants to know, while handling such critical roles on a daily basis, how do you overcome fear and self-doubt to achieve your goals? This is a very interesting question.
It is. So my very simple answer to this question is you never overcome your fear and you never overcome your doubt. It has to, which is why I think somewhere during the discussion I was mentioning that knowing the fear of failure is important. You have to have that fear in your mind, because if you don't have the fear, at some point of time, you will lose the sight between being confident and being overconfident as well. And I think this is where I said that I think self-doubt is always going to be there. But how do you address that self-doubt in that situation is very critical. Who are your genuine critics and well-wishers who will probably tell you the right thing? Like, are you doing the right thing or not, right? And sometimes it's your instincts. This is where your instincts come into play. And which is where I gave the example that you have to be with conviction, sometimes make a decision and move on. And then if it fails, then you got to go and ask for forgiveness. And if it's successful, you get the due credit accordingly on that. And that's why I said that I think you will never, ever overcome that fear and that self-doubt. That will always remain. And if somebody, like, I don't know, if there are leaders, I would love to meet leaders who are like confident saying that I don't have a fear. There are times when I am worried. There are times when I get sleepless nights about a decision I make. And I keep thinking, did I do the right thing? But I have to wait for the outcome to see if it was right or not. So it's all about instincts.
Thank you very much, Sanjay. Before we come to the end of our time, one last question. Anybody has? I will give it a pause a few seconds. Anybody wants to ask? You can please come in. Sanjay, how do you? What do you feel? What's your outlook for Indian pharma? Because how do you plan to meet and support them in the years to come? Because Indian pharma for our country is a very important sector, major revenue generator, but then presently it's more or less generally confined to generics.
Correct.
A company like yours can help take them to regulators' approvals faster. So what is your outlook for Indian pharma, and how do you think Paraxel is going to support them?
Yeah, I think the Indian pharma is pretty much at the right cusp of progression, or what you call a pivot and turning point in the Indian history. First of all, we cannot forget the fact that India has such a brilliant ecosystem when it comes to the generics manufacturing or the drug manufacturing piece of it, right? We have some of the best minds out here. India is a right epitome in terms of the skill sets. We have India generates today the largest number of physicians, the largest number of pharmacy graduates, the largest number of statisticians and biostatisticians that are coming out of the country. Now, with all of these skill sets, with all of that knowledge that at this point of time, I think you would see a lot of the captive sponsors have started setting up their shops in India. So whether it is Pfizer, GSK, Eli Lilly, BMS, everybody's now trying to come to India because they've started to realize that India is becoming no longer a back office, but it is becoming a center of excellence now. It has become a center of excellence from an expertise perspective. Innovation has started happening now in this part of the world and being deployed on the other side of the world as well. And I think you bring a very good point. I think absolutely India is known for biosimilars and generics, but I have started seeing an uptick in terms of new molecules around respiratory aids and cell and gene therapy. I know there are new biotech startups that are now focusing on these areas. And it is a great opportunity right now with the ecosystem that the government is providing, but at the same time, with the new DCGI regulations that came in 2019 from a clinical trial conduct perspective, it's only going to open up the doors. More and more multinational pharma customers are looking at doing studies in India, but at the same time, a lot more Indian biotech pharma companies are doing studies in India, and they're taking the product globally as well. So it's a nice blend of opportunity that's coming in for Paraxel, or not only Paraxel, but just for clinical research organization and pharmaceutical industry. And I believe there's only a positive uptick to this as we go forward. You're right that investment is needed, but the ecosystem is there. The biotech startups or the startup environment, the number of successful startups that have come up in the last 18 months has also proven that it's only going to go in an upward trajectory as we go forward. So I believe there's a lot more opportunity. There's one reason why I came back to India after 18 years. Goes to show that I am personally committed and invested in this country. We have grown from 4,100 to 6,000 people in last 2 years span of time. And I'm sure my peers in the market are also looking for the same kind of growth as we go forward. So I think great career opportunities, good skills available out there, good opportunities especially for young generation students who are coming up into the industry, and good pay packets also. I'm seeing the salary levels also have become very positive within India as we go forward.
Thank you very much, Sanjay. Before we wrap up, I do feel it's my responsibility to give you the last word. We would like to hear any thoughts that you still have in your mind, which you couldn't share today. Any message for our audience, especially our young students and young managers in companies? What would you like to say to them before we wind up?
Yeah, I think my always one piece of advice I tell, two or three pieces of advice. One is I always tell the people, don't stop learning, upscaling and upskilling yourself on a consistent basis. It doesn't matter. Learning is a lifelong journey. You have to keep it on, whether you are a fresh entrant into the business, or whether you are mid-career, or whether you are a senior management, or whether you're almost retiring as well. I think learning never stops. And I think that's something which I always tell people, upscale and upskill yourself on a regular basis. Second is make sure that you find a fine balance between your work-life balance as well. I always tell the young generation, yes, it's great to give the your full-on passion and compassion to the company, but think about and balancing this out with your family as well. Make sure that you give the same passion and compassion on both sides as you get together. And last but not the least, I think empathy. I think it's very, very important for all leaders to be empathetic as you go forward, and bring in that fine balance of head, heart, and guts as you go forward. So that's what.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. I think it's been a wonderful conversation today, and I have learned a lot. And that means when at 73, I'm saying that I really mean it. Wonderful. You covered a vast canvas, of all aspects of leadership, and every aspect of risk-taking, leading with head, heart, guts. You covered every aspect. It has been a wonderful conversation, and we learned a lot. I'll now request Tanvi for the vote of thanks, and please, over to you, Tanvi.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sanjay, for your time and for sharing such valuable insights with our audience. As a token of appreciation from us, we would like to present you with a digital certificate. And we hope that along with us, our audience also found this discussion informative, and they'll be taking back a lot of insights from here. And we will be continuing this discussion on the challenges and rewards. And thank you for sharing your inputs on the same. And thanks for joining us, everybody. And any more questions, anything else, we would be glad to share it with Mr. Sanjay. And thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Sanjay. And this conversation will be available on our website on MIT Institute of Training and Development. The whole conversation video will be available, and will also a script of our conversation with Sanjay would also be available for those of us who want to go into more details or who couldn't attend today. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your conversation today. Thank you.